And while you get your slides pulled up, I will say an official good afternoon, and welcome to everyone who's joining us live today. My name is Samantha Bowers, consultant for continuing education at the State Library of Iowa, and I am joined by Becky Heil, my colleague here at the State Library, who is our consultant for the Southeast District. So Becky is going to talk to us today about wowing funders and bringing money to your library. I hope you had a chance to watch our presentations from the Foundation Directory last week and how to use that tool. We'll talk just a little bit about Foundation Directory today, but it really is more about moving beyond that sort of identification space a little bit. We're going to talk about that a little bit. So Becky, the floor is yours.
Right. All right. Thank you. I've been telling people that I really got interested in grant writing when I took a week-long workshop from the Grantsmanship Center, which is a huge grant place out of California. And I kept all of my notes from that, and it was one of the best things I have ever attended in my life. I learned all kinds of tips and tricks and hints. And so I've been actually doing a version of this presentation since, I don't know, 2007, 2008, something like that. So there's lots and lots of information in here. Typically, this presentation is limited to writing the grant, not where to find it. But I keep getting asked that question over and over again. So I am going to spend a little bit of time and introduce places where you might go to actually look for grants. And I started the presentation I did a couple of weeks ago with this quote that I really like. I think it gets at the absolute three main points of how to get your grant funded. The first thing is you have to have a good idea. That really is the key to writing any grant. The second is you really want to find the right place to ask. I have a quote somewhere later on about, grants don't happen by accident. Grants happen through research, and you get the right project for the right funder. And I really think that's what it is. And then the last piece is what we're going to spend some time on today. How do you write that superior proposal? What goes into the actual writing of that grant? And I hate reading off my screen, so I apologize if my page flipping here is annoying. The info that you see on the screen right now comes from an organization called Giving USA. They have been gathering data on charitable giving for years and years and have kept it up. And so they've got a lot of historical data as well. The thing that I think is interesting is that number on the top. In 2021, Americans gave $484 billion to charity. It was a slight increase over the last couple of years, but when you factor inflation in, it was actually a small decrease. So charitable giving has been fairly flat for quite a while. One of the things that I think is interesting is you can see in the red square, one of those kind of orangey red squares, 19% of charitable giving is from foundations. The bulk of charitable foundations, or the bulk of funding, comes through individuals. What that means, I think, is when you look at this piece of the slide on the right there is religion happens to be the number one place that charitable dollars go. But that kind of makes sense. When you think about what individuals give to, that tends to be a higher proportion of what they do. So that kind of makes sense. So when you look at that list of things that are typically funded, I think there's a couple of places that libraries fit. Libraries could fit under that public good, or the benefit to society. That's one of the places that they've broken it down into. Libraries, I think, can also certainly fit under the arts and cultures and humanities, and sometimes we fit under education. The bad news is education funding has actually gone down over the last few years, but giving to public and societal good is up by 23%, and to arts, culture, and humanities is also up by 27%. So what I think when I hear that is, instead of maybe focusing on some of the educational aspects that we're looking at, take a look at ways that you can position your library into that arts and culture, or we are a public good. What is it that we're providing to the community, and maybe leave out some of the educational part if that's something that people aren't really interested in funding. So we're going to try to get three things accomplished today. We're going to identify why you need to write a grant, and then a couple of rules for getting them funded. And then we're going to take a look in that middle section of sort of putting the pieces of the proposal together. And then the last one, are there any grants out there anymore? Many of you who have been doing this job for a while have probably noticed that the funding that's available now is not like it was in the past. It is significantly less than what we used to be able to get 20 years ago. So how do we find that anymore? So really, instead of starting with the why, I really want to start with the why not. You might think after seeing that $484 or $484 billion that's given to charity that you may think that the main reason to get a grant is because you need money. But that's actually the first thing on my list of reasons not to write a grant. It is not a good enough reason to say, my city won't give me enough funding, so we need somebody else to help keep us going. That is absolutely the wrong reason to write a grant. A couple more reasons not to write a grant: if you don't have the expertise to pull it off, make sure that it's a project that you can actually do. If you don't have don't have enough time to write a good proposal, don't waste your time doing a sloppy one, because you're not going to get funded anyway. So don't write it if you don't have the time right then. Corollary to that is don't write it if you don't have time to actually finish the project. Make sure that you meet the qualifications of the funder. Many times they will have requirements. It may be geographic. It may be, you have to have a Dollar General in your town. Whatever those requirements are, don't bother writing it. If you don't fit those requirements, it's not worth the time for you to do that. If there's no need for that project, if you can't identify this is why people in my community need this, if there's not information out there to prove that, don't bother writing a grant for that. And then the last one is, think about the time that it's going to take you to write a grant, and it will vary anything from just a couple of hours to weeks of your time that you will spend on writing a grant. So look at what you're going to get in return. Think about how much you get paid per hour. Is it going to be worth what I get, if I invest this amount of time? So that's another reason, if it's not going to be worth your time, don't bother writing that grant. So what are some good reasons to write a grant? I like to go back to that quote. If you have a really great idea that solves a community issue or a problem or addresses a community need, that is the absolute best reason to write a grant. The rest of these are kind of the opposite of the last slide that I did. If you've got time to develop it into a really great proposal, if you have a conception of how that idea that you have can become reality, if there's an agency or an organization out there that would fund it, if you can demonstrate a need, kind of going back to that first piece again, if you've got the expertise to successfully implement it, and one that's really critical, and I just heard about a problem with it last night, literally, about an issue with this, and that is you need to make sure that your organization, whether it is your city or your library board, or if you're a youth librarian, make sure that it's your director, make sure that that overarching agency will support and endorse your idea. You can't just go off and be doing this without that support. Many of the community grants that are out there, they will only give money to one arm of city government. So, you're going up against maybe the city parks, you're going up against the fire department, you're going up against, whoever else they need a new, city hall or something. And the organization will only fund one of those. So make sure that you have the support of the city, that you get to be the one writing the grant this year for the library. So these are a couple of rules. These were ones that I actually learned back in that grant writing workshop, but I have found these rules all across the internet. So either the Grantsmanship Center did a really great job, it has trained a whole lot of people on these 4 rules, or one of my early sessions got out there and everybody's just sort of taken it from that. I'm not sure, but these actually did come from the Grantsmanship, the Grantsmanship Center. I have had 4 in the past, but I've actually added one. I've taken a couple more workshops, and I think it's kind of important for people to recognize this 5th rule. So let's take a look at some of these one at a time. The first one is know your funder. I have a couple of hints on this one. Again, things that I've learned throughout my time writing and getting grants, as well as my time. I actually am a grant reviewer for the National Science Foundation, so I've learned a lot through that as well. And then I've spoken with a lot of foundations. One of the best pieces of advice I can give you is Remember that their job is to give away money. They want you to be successful. So talk to them before you put in a lot of time. Give that funding agency a call, send them an email and say, here's what I'm thinking. Does this fit? They will be happy to say, you know what, that's not going to work. But if you changed it a little bit like this, you would fit better within the where we give money. Or they may be able to give you tips. You know, they're not going to probably review your grant for you, but they will answer any questions, and that's what they're there for. They almost everyone has somebody on staff that is willing to just sort of talk to you about what some of the questions are that you have on that grant and help you make a better proposal. Another one is do your research. Get copies of things like the foundation's annual reports. Find out what they've funded in the past. Get a list of who they've funded. Sometimes they will even give you copies of a project that they have funded in the past. So we're going to talk about that. If you went to the foundation directory presentation last week, I think it was, you can find some of that information there, but there are a couple of other places you can go to look on that. Another one that I think is really important is different funders do have different priorities and different approaches. So know what their funding priorities are and know what they funded in the past. Your project may not fit this year. They may change it next year. Some people have a very easy form to fill out. Some want a really high level, they'll list all of the requirements of the things that you have to put in there. Even down to the size font that you can use when you fill out their forms. So make sure as you're looking at that you really know what their approach is. How are they looking at this? What kind of quality are they looking for as well? Funders want to know that you can achieve what you propose. They want to know that, yes, this is a great idea and I know what to do to make this work. They need to know that you're going to have a project that is going to make an impact. How do we let them know that this is going to make an impact in our community? Is it sustainable? They want you to find partners. You know, the more partners, the better. I have heard that over and over from funders right now is they feel like their money goes farther. If you have brought in other partners, you can have a better project, and they are much happier to fund that, fund things that way. This was a quote that I wrote down exactly as they gave it to us, and I really thought it was interesting. Funders do not want dependents. Let them know how you're going to continue to fund this. They are happy to give you money to get something up and off the ground. They don't want to keep paying for this program for the next 10 years. They want to put their money somewhere else. So they want to know that you have what it's going to take to make this sustainable. How are we going to continue to fund this in the future? So that's another thing that funders really want to see. Another one, this is a rule that I had read, and I'm not totally sure I agree with it. It says funders want public recognition for funding your group. They want to know what's in it for me. I think that's true in a lot of foundations. You know, they want to have that sticker on the laptop that they bought for you that says this is where it came from. But I don't know that that's true of everybody. So again, as you try to find out about that funder, figure out, is this something that they want? Do they want a huge press release? Do they want their picture in the paper, with them giving you the check? Figure out what it is that makes them happy. The other piece of advice that kind of goes along with that is your relationship with them is not adversarial. It's not, oh, I'm trying to get this and they're going to keep it from me. Make it a partnership. And so know what that funder wants in a partner. This one should really be self-evident. Follow the rules. Whatever they tell you needs to be in there, make sure it is in there. Almost everybody will have some type of guidelines, and they'll tell you things like submission deadlines, eligibility, what kind of a format they want to see on it, even things like the restrictions on the number of pages or the number of supporting documents you can put in. It should also give you a review timetable so that if I turn it in by this date, they will have them all reviewed by a month later, and then they will make their decision a month after that. So generally those guidelines will give you an idea of how long this process is going to take. you can also sometimes find out about their priorities and their goals in those guidelines. That's another good place to look for that information. Find out about their budgetary requirements. What type of a budget do they want to see? Most of them don't particularly like a narrative, or maybe a piece of it could be narrative, but they want to see a spreadsheet. They want to make sure your numbers are right in there. So follow their rules when you're doing that. Learn about their payment process. One of the things we at the State Library do when we give out grants is you have to pay for it up front, and then we reimburse you. Sometimes that's the way it works. Sometimes they will pay it directly. You send them the invoice and they send it. So find out what that process is. Also find out, sometimes funders will have several different types of grants available. They may have one that's a startup grant. So here's what we're going to do to get this program launched. You know, we want to start providing food for the kids in our community, and so we need to purchase these things to get it up and going. Maybe you've already got it up and going, but you want to expand it. We want to take it to the senior citizen centers, and so we'd like to take this kitchen that we've already invested in, and we'd like you to help us make it larger and take it out somewhere else. So they may have 2 or 3 different, sometimes there are bridge grants, there are, you know, step up or level up grants, there are, you know, grants for first time projects, there are grants for pilot projects a lot. We're going to try this. If it doesn't work, oh well. And there are people out there who will fund that kind of a project. So make sure that you're applying for the right one when you're looking at that. And then also know their requirements for eligibility. Some say you have to have a 501c3, which means public library can't do it, but your friends group or your foundation can. Or sometimes the city will have a 501c3 that you can fall under. Sometimes it just needs to be any kind of other nonprofit. Sometimes it's only for government. And as a library, you're an arm of that city government. So make sure that you meet those eligibility requirements. And then do your homework. Be grant ready is kind of the way people say it. And I tell this story all the time. I usually had all these ideas that I was thinking about, you know, oh, if we only had money, I could do this. And I would buy it from here and I would get this, and I'd be thinking about it for a couple of years sometime. And then the right place would come along to apply for that. It didn't take me any time at all to write it because I've been thinking about it for 2 years. I had already done all of the research. So, you know, as you're kind of out and about and talking to your staff or talking to your board or looking at your library and thinking, ooh, I'd like to do this, spend a little bit more time and think it through a little bit farther. And then when it comes time to write that grant, you've already done all that homework. Let's see. Oh, I also have one other piece about that, and this sort of has to do with timelines as well, and the doing your homework piece. I did not one time. I had been applying for this same grant and had gotten it year after year after year after year. And there was one piece of information that they always ask for. And I always wrote a little note and I said, you know, I'm part of county government. And so I don't have that information. So I can't, you know, I can't give it to you. And I'd get the grant anyway. You know, I just wrote that little explanation and for years I got it. I did that same thing one year, turned it in, and I got denied. And so I called the organization. I said, you know, I've always done it like this. And they said, well, we changed the rules and now you have to have that. And I said, you know, it would have been nice if you'd have told me that you changed the rules. And she said, well, if you'd have turned it in early instead of at the very last minute, we would have told you that. We'd have sent it back and said, oh, don't forget you have to have this in here too. So had I done it ahead of time, I would have got some feedback from them that said, oops, you're missing something. So that do your homework, make sure you understand all of the things that are the requirements that are out there. But then also, if you have time to get it in ahead, you will sometimes get pieces of information like that. So this is the one that I've added to my list of 4. This makes the 5th one. Have a credible organization. And as a public library, for the most part, you really already are. But the pieces that go into that are things like, you know, your funder wants to know about your experience. They want to know, you know, what kind of sustainability is out there. What are you going to do to keep this going? How long have you been operating as a public library? But I think another piece of that is making sure that they understand that you're not you're not just something new that sort of just came on the scene. You've been around for a long time. You have done other projects. I think this one is a little bit more important for other organizations perhaps than a public library, but I think it's a piece that you want to include in there as you're doing it. Make sure that they know that you have training so that you know what you're doing when you do this. Let's see, and this to me is the most important one. This is the absolute top rule in my estimation. This grant is not for you. The grant is not for the library. The grant is to solve a problem. You don't write to get furniture. You write to help people. And that, I think, if you take nothing else away from this, that's the thing I want you to remember. The library, I say this all the time, the library doesn't need furniture. Your teens need furniture. Your seniors need, a place to sit in comfort. Whatever it is, the library doesn't need anything. It's what it is that you're providing for your community. That's what you need to get back to. So now let's sort of move into that how piece. I'm going to try and keep it. Oh, I don't have a watch on. And of course, my screen is covered and I don't have a clock in here. Well, Sam, you're going to have to start. Oh, there's a time. Okay, 1:23. I'm doing all right. Otherwise, somebody's going to have to tell me when it's time to shut up. So now I want to kind of launch into the how. As I said earlier, a lot of funders have different approaches. So not every grant is going to be exactly the same. But most of them are going to have, I've got, I think, 5 pieces here. And in some shape, these 5 pieces are going to be a part of what you're going to have to fill out and do when you're writing this grant. The first one is going to be the executive summary. Sometimes it's called an abstract. What we suggest is you want to write this last. After everything else is done, you're going to go back and write that executive summary. But it's going to be the first thing they read. So you want it to have a clear and unambiguous title. Not too cutesy. A little cute is okay. They kind of like clever. But they need to know, when you have that title, they need to know exactly what your grant is about. So make it very descriptive. Your summary should be brief. It should be clear, complete, engaging. It should tell your story, who you are, what the issue is, what you expect from the results, how are you going to do it, your total cost, what you expect from the donor. And a piece of information here is, pull words from their guidelines, from their website. We are interested in feeding hungry kids. Use that when you're sticking it in your executive summary. That's going to click in their brain when they're reading through that. Make it a compelling story. This executive summary should touch on all the components of the grant proposal, but it should be brief. And then a quote again that I wrote down that I really like is, lead with the need. So here's the need, and now this is who we are and what we're going to do to solve that. So, a brief, and again, they may have guidelines on how long that can be. A page is not bad if you're, doing a regular thing. Your executive summary, a couple, 3 paragraphs is a good way to do that. Let's see. The next piece is going to be the narrative. And sometimes I've got the narrative broken down into about 5 or 6 different pieces. Sometimes this will be a separate portion. Sometimes it'll all be wrapped up in the narrative. So just know, generally there is a place where you've got, a couple of pages where you're going to describe everything that's going on in here. Sometimes it'll be, we want this on this page, this on that page, and something else on the 3rd page. Sometimes it's all wrapped into one. So the narrative should include information about your organizational credibility. How long have you been around? What are your goals and objectives? What's the method you're going to use to do this? What's the timeline? It should also include some evaluation. It's going to include, what are you going to do? Those things are all going to be in there. You're going to want to state your need in here, although need is coming up a little bit later. I usually pull that out separately. How are you going to know if you're successful? It also will be the place where you're going to talk about collaborations and partnerships. We're going to be working on this with this, or in order to determine the need, we worked with this local organization or this national organization that helped us figure out what the need is here locally. So we're going to touch on kind of each of those components here now. So the first piece is going to be about your organization, kind of an intro to you. It should have a description of your organization. It should answer the question, why do you exist? What is your mission? This is also where you want to prove your credibility. Talk about your financial stability. Talk about any awards that you've won. What kind of endorsements have you gotten from people? How long have you been around? Talk about your past successes. That can all get wrapped up into this part about your organization. Another thing, not all grants require this, but if you've got space for it, even if they don't ask for it, it's nice to put in the credentials of the primary staff members who are going to be in charge of this project. You know, are you working, you know, maybe you're a library director and you're going to be setting up some kind of new preschool programming and you have a background as a preschool teacher. You know, bring that in, let them know that this is the person in charge and this is their background and their credentials for doing this. This is also the place where you can talk about who do you serve. And that can include geographic area, you know, I serve the city and its environs, or it could be, you know, if you're a different kind of organization, you know, we serve, you know, seniors or we serve preschool kids. So think about who it is that you serve. We serve, you know, the underserved. That's a focus of our public library. This can also be a place to talk about the community support that you have. Kind of goes along with those partnerships and collaborations and what kind of past successes you've had. But, you know, what are the things that your community gets involved with at your library to show that we definitely, as a public library, have the support of our community? This is a place where you can talk about your commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then the last piece that I think is important here is, does this project fit in your organizational long-range plan? So we harp on it all the time. We want every public library to have a long-range plan. Where are you going to be in the next 3 to 5 years? Does this project help you get there? That just proves to this funding agency that you have a plan for the future, and this is something that's going to help you get there. And that can be really important to make sure that this project fits in that long-range plan. Now, this is where I flip a little bit. We're going to talk about goals and objectives, which we usually talk about in your organizational long-range plan, but this one isn't about that. It's not in your overall plan. We're going to talk about the goals and objectives for the actual project. So you want to have a stated goal and some measurable objectives. They should offer a compelling, logical reason why this proposal should be supported. It can make it really a lot easier to evaluate too. And then your objectives will also be part of your timeline. So, you know, depending on what your project is, you know, come up with that goal. What do we want? Who's going to get a benefit at the end of this? And what are they going to get? That was drilled into me. That's the best way I find to figure out a goal. Who's going to get a benefit and what are they going to get? Teens are going to have a safe, comfortable place to hang out after school. That's your goal. Then we come up with those objectives. How are we going to do that? So once you state the goal of that project, then it's really easy to say, did we do that? Here's how we're going to determine if we accomplished all of these things. We look at those objectives. Did we, you know, survey the teens to find out if they like their new space? Did we buy the furniture? Once you have those concrete measurable objectives in place, evaluation is going to be much easier. And I'll talk in a second about the evaluation piece. Another part of, whoops, I'm lost on a few pages here. Another part of that narrative, and frequently a large part, is going to be your project description. This is kind of the method. It's the process of accomplishing those goals and objectives. It describes your intended scope of work with your expected outcomes. It outlines the activities that you're going to do. This is a place where you can put in some of that personnel information. You know, so-and-so is going to be doing this. Anybody who reads this proposal should be able to answer the following questions. And I think this is where it comes in that project description. What are you going to do? Why do you want to do it? How are you going to do it? Who is going to be involved? How much is it going to cost? and who is going to be served. Is it a geographic area, or do you have a specific target population? And then the last piece is, what resources do you need to complete the project? If you can answer all of those questions in that project description, you're going to have it all ready to go. I mean, that's your method. It's got everything all right there. What are you going to do? Why? How are you going to do it? Who's going to be part of it? How much is it going to cost? And who are we going to help? Many times they will ask you for a timeline. Frequently, it's a part of the narrative. If it's not, it may be something completely separate, but I see that in a lot of grants that I review. They ask you to sort of put together a timeline, and it really just paints a picture of the project flow. It should include the start dates, schedule of the activities, and again, what you think those outcomes are going to be. It should be detailed enough to include, the staff. This person is going to do that. So again, if you've got the space in there to do it, even if they don't ask for it, a timeline is a very concrete, visual way for people to see what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. And then I think this is the last piece. Yes, the last piece of the narrative, and again, sometimes it's pulled out, is the evaluation. The evaluation should answer a couple of questions. What info are you going to need to collect in order to evaluate this? And what are you going to use that information for? What tools are you going to use? Are you going to test people? Was this a successful project? We tested the kids at the beginning and they didn't know how to do this. We tested them at the end and they did. You can use anecdotes, let people, tell you stories about it. You can use surveys. So that's so what info do we need to collect? And then what tools are you going to use? And then, did it work? How are we going to know if it worked? If we've finished this project, how are we going to know if it was successful or not? I have found this, and I have heard this from lots of other grant reviewers. The evaluation piece is frequently the weakest area, and I have turned down grants because they had nothing in there about evaluation, or they didn't really understand what this piece was. Make sure you understand this and have it included in there. You're going to want to use both hard data and soft data, so things like quantitative and qualitative. And Sam, I've got one more slide on my outputs and outcomes that I've got coming up. This is one of my favorite things. I learned about this, and it makes it so clear and easy to evaluate when you think of it in this way. I think there's a whole bunch of methods that you can use. Like I said, pre-test and post-test. You can use an evaluation survey, testimonials. Really large grants will require you to use an outside evaluator. So you don't get to evaluate your own. You pay them and they come in and they will look at, here's what you said you were going to do. Did you do it? And they will write up an evaluation. When I do this for National Science Foundation, I mean, we give out $1 million in some of our grants, but they all have to hire an outside evaluator to come in and determine whether or not they have accomplished what they said they were going to. So here's my favorite part. The outcomes-based evaluation came about, or at least in my mind, maybe 15, 18 years ago or so is when that really started to come into the library world anyway. Librarians are really good at outputs. How many people came? How many programs did we do? What's the age group of the people who showed up? We know that hard data, that quantitative data. We're really good at that. What we're seeing is more and more funders want to know about the outcomes. Yeah, it's great you talked to 50 kids that day, but what changed in their life? What is different about them? What did they learn? What has changed because of something you did? They want to know those outcomes. And I have to confess, I stole these pictures from Alicia Pike, who was our continuing ed coordinator a couple of years ago, and I kind of like that. The outputs, we bake the cookies. We've got 12 cookies with this. The outcomes is, what's changing, what's growing inside of those folks that you have touched with this. And I will never not put in a plug for Project Outcome. It's a great way when you're evaluating programs. The surveys are all done for you. It gives you these great graphs. If you don't know about it, absolutely make sure, if you're doing programming, to look at Project Outcome to get outcome-based evaluations. So the next piece after the narrative is that needs statement. It should talk about values. Things like not knowing how to read is a problem. So we have a need in our community. We have researched and we have found that we have the lowest literacy rate in our county in the entire state, or we are one of the top 5, or the bottom 5 or whatever it is. Do your research, find out what is out there. Let's see, how am I trying to say this? Figure out what those needs are in your community and then how you're going to solve that and back it up with the research. Don't focus on the agency again. This is something I want to say we learned this from Jamie LaRue. We're not focusing on the agency. We are not the angels coming in to save the town. The needs are the people. We just have a solution to it. And so we are going to help them get what they need. We're not solving the problem, we're helping them solve that problem. Talk about the cause. Why does this problem exist? Okay, so we've documented that statistics show that we have the lowest literacy rates. Why is that? What's that connected to? So talk about that cause. There's lots of places where you can go to get that information. The Iowa Data Center is a place that right off of our website, you can get lots of great information to sort of do that research and back up those needs. The need is kind of the before picture. Here's what our community looks like now, in this little focused piece. And afterwards, this is what we intend it to look like. We want to see that number go up, or we want to see that number go down, whatever the things are that you're doing. Think about who needs the help. What problems do they have? Why is this a problem? Where is this happening? When is this happening? And how do you know? And so again, go back to that research piece. Budget also tends to be a weak place. I am absolutely amazed and appalled when I'm looking at a budget in a grant as a reviewer and their numbers don't add up. That's a rookie mistake. Don't ever have mistakes in your budget. If you need to send it off to somebody else to have them look at it, throw it into Excel so it does the formulas on its own. Mistakes in a budget will get something tossed out faster than just about anything else. So always make sure that your budget is accurate. That's kind of the key on that one. It should account for everything. And so, yes, I'm asking you to give me this much money for this project, but I've also got contributions from other agencies that are going to count to this. The United Way has given us money for this project. Our city is going to give us money for this project. We're taking money out of our budget, or our friends, or our foundation. So all of the pieces. So they want to know, what's this thing going to cost overall? And what's my portion of this? What do I have to contribute to this? So make sure everything is in there. Again, go back to their guidelines. Most of them will ask you to include in-kind dollars. My staff time, as I put this program together, it's going to be this many hours at this much salary. And so we are providing in-kind services of X amount of dollars. Some of them don't want that in. So again, make sure that you read those guidelines. Most of the time they do. Make sure that what you include in there is eligible. IMLS, Institute for Museum and Library Services, infamously or famously does not allow money for food. And so anytime you include, if you're writing an IMLS grant, you include money for food in there, it's going to get kicked out, because that's absolutely a no-no in theirs. And it's very clear in their guidelines that you're not able to do that. Remember that your budget is an estimate, and they all understand that. You priced something at Amazon to buy 100 things to put together the kits, and it went up in that time. They understand that, they know that. Generally, you'll get a specific amount, and you're gonna have to figure out where that extra is going to come from, but they understand if the invoice comes in larger for something or smaller for something else. And we all saw that happen with the ARPA grants. Things changed dramatically from when you all wrote those grants to when we were actually able to get them. Be reasonable. That's another piece that's in there. They don't want to see, all kinds of outrageous things on there. They want to know that what you have in there is absolutely essential for what you're doing. And like I said, budget could also be pulled out. Sometimes they'll have that as a separate thing as well, and you have to fill it in on theirs. Budget things to sort of consider are cash. I mean, are you getting donations for that? Think about staff and volunteer time. You know, that's a paid in-kind service. Travel sometimes, supplies, equipment, space, if you have to rent space in order to do something. Maybe you're doing, you know, community conversation and you have to rent the community center to be able to do that. Supplies, equipment, I already said those. Promotional things, if you need to hire outside contractors. And then there are all those indirect costs that are there. You know, you make copies of things and you just figure, oh, it's the library copy machine. That can also be added into your budget. We're going to need 600 copies of, you know, these 3 items, and it costs us this much to do that. Sometimes you'll have to create a website. And so you'll need to find, you know, how much money is it going to cost to host that? So those are all things to think about when you're putting that budget together. And the last piece, hang on, where did I go? Too many more. The last piece for that sort of how is supporting documents. And again, every funder is going to be different. Some will have a limit. Some will say you must include this, this, and this. Some will say you can't upload anything extra. You fill out our form and that's it. If they are going to have other supporting documents that you can send in, it could be things like a letter of commitment. So maybe a partner organization will say, you know, I am committed, you know, on my letterhead, you know, we are committed to, you know, providing a half-time person to provide this, or, you know, this business, we are willing to give, you know, X amount of free pizzas for the program, whatever it is, on their letterhead. So it would be a letter of commitment. Sometimes those are called letter of support. And if you you can separate those out. Commitment could be, we're committed to helping with this project, or it could be, we're committed to X amount of dollars. So kind of think about that as you're asking for those. Sometimes they'll ask for a cover letter along with it. So that might be one of your supporting documents. Any kind of endorsement that you've got out there, or other resources. Some of the grants that I've worked on applying for, that I've reviewed, they'll ask for the resumes of the people who are involved, and that would be a supporting document that you might need to upload. So, you know, have all that stuff in hand before you sit down and start writing all of this. Let's see. Other, you know, letters could be from your city that says, yes, we support the library in writing this. You know, they're not saying we're going to give you any money. They're not saying we're going to help you, but we support this application. And again, you can get that from your partners as well. For those letters of support, a template is not a good idea necessarily, because you don't want, you know, the business to look at the same as the city, you know, letter of support. So don't just send them a template and say, here, fill this out for us. But if they need help, it's always nice for you as the person asking for the money to say, this is what we're trying to accomplish with our proposal. So if you can help support that with, you know, your background, give them some words that you want to use, some key concepts, some of your goals, and let them sort of put that in. And I also will say, I have also had people just send me the letter and say, are you able to sign this? I read through it and I go, yep, I agree with all of that, and I can sign it off. So if you want to prepare that letter in advance, if that makes it easier for that person who's going to support your project, go ahead and fill it out and ask them if they're able to do that. All right, let's see here. Writing tips. How am I doing on time? Yeah, I got to finish this one up. I may put some of this into a handout so that we aren't going to do this. I think the key here on the writing tips is good grant writing is good writing. It needs to be clear. It needs to be concise. It needs to be specific. It needs to be concrete. It needs to be in the active voice. It needs to tell a compelling story. I've got a few more things on there, but it's all stuff that I know you know, obviously accurate and you know, no spelling mistakes in there. And no jargon. That's another one that I always throw in with that one. You know, don't talk about ALA or PLA or, you know, what were some of the other ones, a CERC or a record. So make sure that you've got no jargon that's in there. So now we get to the where, and I'm asked all the time, and I just saw something kind of flip through, where do I find grants? That's the big question, and that's the one I really can't answer specifically for you, because again, you're trying to match what you're asking for with those funders that are out there. So I will say this again, the state library is continuing to provide the foundation directory online for every public library in the state. It was put on a lot of the PLOW websites, but I found out today it wasn't put on all of them. And it also may need to be set up before you can actually use it. So go to the online resources page on our website and you'll get information there. Your consultant or LRT can help you get that set up. And then again, if you don't know how to use it, be sure to check out those sessions. I'm sure it will be on our YouTube channel and it will be in Iowa Learns. We did 2 sessions last week or whenever that was. And then, make sure that you know how to use that, because this has got tons of resources on there. And a lot of the things that I talked about, you will be able to find through this. Another one that I want to make sure everyone is aware of is iowacommunityfoundations.org. Several years ago, many years ago, the state legislature decided that every county needed to have a community foundation, and there was ways that they gave some tax breaks to those foundations. They took some of the gambling money and divided it up between some of those, and so it became a thing. iowacommunityfoundations.org is where you can go to find out what is that local foundation in your county and how do you apply for that money. It's a place where individuals can give money. Somebody gets, $10,000 and they want to give it, but they don't know who to give it to. They can give it to that totally unspecified. They can give it to that community foundation and they put it in a big pot and it gets divvied out in these grants that they give once a year. Or they can give it to the community foundation and say, this is for the library and we want them to use it like this. So those community foundations can be used for individuals. Corporations can give to them. There's all kinds of ways that they get their money and a variety of ways that they distribute it. Every county is different. So go to that and make sure you know what's out there for your county. It's one of the easiest places to get grants. 3 more resources that I want to tell you about is that Grantsmanship Center. They actually have a lot of free resources out there, articles, some research that's out there. So be sure to look at those. This other one that I'd never heard of before, let me see if I can find the name of it, Instrumenti. At first it didn't look legit, but I did a little bit of investigating on it. And they also have some really good articles out there and some advice for writing it. You can purchase their services as well, but they have some pretty good basic stuff out there for free as well. And then the Iowa Nonprofit Resource Center has information on their website as well. This is just a variety of places, and I will definitely get these onto a handout. A friend of mine, Stephanie Girding, writes a blog called Library Grants, and you can find that up there. And she highlights grants that are coming up. She talks about tips and tricks for it. She has written several books for, I think, ALA on grant writing. Scholastic has a couple of articles, as well as places where you can go to get grants, and they'll list some of those. Grants.gov is another big one for the government grants that are out there. And surprise, EBSCO has, in their EBSCO Connect, they actually have a web page that's grant funding sources for libraries, and it lists the grants that are out there, like Dollar General or the Eric Carle, or not Eric Carle, the Ezra Jack Keats, or some of those other ones that are out there that you see year after year. 3 tips, and then I'm done. Hey, I hit pretty close. This is the first one. Remember, grants are not charity. Grants are investments. You really have to change your thinking about that. But that's how funders see this. They don't see it as charity. They see it as an investment in the community. And I think once you get that in your head, it makes it ever so much easier to write that grant and get funded. Make sure you get that review criteria. Many of them will give that to you. They'll say, we're going to get all these grants in and we're going to make it against this metric. Here's our checklist. We're going to want you to have this, 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 and not just pieces, but you're going to get extra points for, no spelling errors. You're going to get, or points taken off for spelling errors, whatever. So they actually have a metric that they will use. And if you can get access to that ahead of time, you're right to the metric, and make sure you got all those things in there. Leverage your money. Funders like to know that a project is backed by other funders and that it's going to be sustainable for the future. This is one of the quotes that I knew I had in here someplace. Funding matches are made through research, not by chance. Always say thank you, even when you don't get it. Make sure you thank them, because you're going to apply again next year probably. And I like this one. Be persistent, but not obnoxious. And I thought that was a good piece of advice. So that is a whirlwind of stuff. And I know there were a few a few questions that ran through there. So Sam, do you want to do those for me, and I'll see what I can do? Or if there's somebody else out there?
No, I'm happy to do it. I think is my video showing for folks? I can't see myself.
For me. I'm going to stop the share and then we'll.
Okay. There we go. Oh, now I can see me. Well, so we did have one question. Are there grants coming up from the state library?
I don't have an answer for that one. Do you have an answer for that one?
I do not. Apart from our space utilization grant, which I hesitate to almost say out loud, which is a sort of perpetually running one, correct?
Right.
And folks can apply for that. So keep an eye out for information on that. I also know that there have been some bigger picture conversations around that grant as well. So I'm sure we'll have more promotion to do on that topic. And I see Brenda I didn't see that she was in. So Brenda is the one to answer that question if there's anything, and she put in space utilization grant. So very good. Susie, that's the one that we know is coming up. Okay, great. And Brenda, feel free to drop in the chat if you want me to unmute you. You can share more about that if you wish. That same comment, this is Susan from Clinton, says, I wish there was a way to see parts of winning grants to compare with. So if you did not get the grant, could you look at who did and see what they wrote so they won? And she also points out that things like AI chat could make that, you're going to be up against computers potentially writing justifications. Although to that, I might say, like, using chat GPT or another AI chat might not be a bad thing to say, hey, write me some narrative around why our library needs to solve this problem. But don't trust it, of course, don't just copy and paste and put that in there, but you might get some good ideas for inspiration as well. But certainly something. I like that. That's really interesting. Yes. Something to think about. Yeah. Yeah. Andrew, and there are places, to get to Susie's point, there are places. Frequently, if you call them up afterwards and ask, why didn't I get funded? They will tell you. Some of the grants that I work on, I did some for ALA, and we actually had to write and say why they were or why they weren't funded. And so that comes back to you when you get your award letter, whether or not you were. So there are lots of them that will do that. It used to be in the foundation directory, and he didn't mention this, so maybe it's not there anymore, but you used to actually get copies of funded grants. And I don't know if, maybe the agency stopped doing that, but you actually could get it through foundation directory online for a while. And it could be something to ask that funder as well. Could I see a copy of, what they submitted? It doesn't hurt to ask. And that's kind of what Andrew says as well about asking for feedback. Doesn't hurt to ask. Yep. And here's a question from someone that came directly to the host. It says, is there anywhere to find guidelines for how to estimate expenses if you can't afford a planner or someone to do it for you? I'm not totally sure I completely understand that question, but I would say, again, go back to whoever is answering the phone or the email about that. What kind of how specific do they want their budget to be? Can I estimate? I haven't picked. So I think if I'm
I just think I maybe figured this out. So you're going to do the space utilization grant, but you haven't picked who you're going to do yet. It might run you $2,000 for this one. It might run you $8,000 for that one. So how do you estimate that? I think that's if that's the question, I think that's a question that you need to go to your funder and ask them just flat out. And they're again, they're happy to tell you that. You're not their adversary. They are there to support you.
But also, it is also an example of how doing that homework on the front end is super important. So you wouldn't want to apply for the grant and say, oh, I bet this is going to cost $3,000. And then you get out and do the research and you find it's going to cost $5,000.
Exactly.
And now all of a sudden you're left to cover that or scrap the project if you can't.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So do your homework line. Another person commenting on how helpful the Grantmanship Center training was.
Yeah.
Very good. Oh, here's a great question from Janine at the very bottom of the chat. Tips you have to coordinate with other groups in your community so that you're not stepping on toes if you and the Parks and Rec are going up for that same community foundation grant.
Yes, I will throw that open to anybody else who's in the room who's maybe dealt with that. So while you guys are typing, I'll tell you a quick story that I had in my notes and didn't tell. I was looking for laptops. I wanted to have a laptop lab in my library, and the library down the road from me also wanted to write a grant for laptops. And we couldn't decide, should we do this together? Because yes, partnerships are, if we do it together, maybe we'd have a better chance of getting funded. Maybe we should do it separately. We both knew we were writing kind of for the same thing. We were going to be in competition with each other. We called, and the woman at that point said, I want you each to write it separately. We like to fund libraries, and we want to give you both your own laptop lab. We don't want you to have to share it, so don't write it together. We can give out twice as much money that way. That may not have been an answer from somebody else, but that's the answer we got. So again, ask that question. And I think the coordinating with other groups, if we lived in a perfect world, you would be going to monthly meetings with all the other department heads in your city. And so you'd be talking to Parks and Rec, and you'd be saying, we want to do a summer program, and they'd say, oh, maybe we could partner on that, or, oh no, we're planning to do this. And then if it is, you got 6 groups and they all want to apply, city council gets to say, it's you guys or it's not. And you can make your case, but you may not have a choice in that one.
In that case, it's almost like a mini pre-grant, right? Because you want to be able to go to the city council and say, here's why you should let me go for this one this year.
Yes.
And not the fire department or whoever else it is.
Right.
This is a question, your comment about partnerships, and we just have about a minute left. But in the first session that we did with Foundation Director, there's a question that came up that does, in general, would you say that having those community partners, whether that is, a city department or, maybe your friends or foundation or in like the schools or somebody, does that make you more attractive to a funder if you have those community partners?
I would say most of the time, yes. Again, funders differ, and maybe they want them separate, who knows, but yes. Again, the more leverage you have, the more people that you're getting involved, the more successful they think your project is going to be, and that's what they want, is a successful project. So yeah, absolutely, that's critical.
Yeah, we have a couple people chiming in on the multiple city departments going after grants thing. One person says a weekly city staff meeting is really helpful. Yep. I think I agree with that. It helps, keep lines of communication open and flowing. Another person said that kind of what you were saying, Becky, where multiple groups went after the same grant and then they got to congratulate each other. So that's really exciting. And think of that press release too that gets to go out to the newspaper at that point. Library and fire departments each receive great grants from whatever community foundation. So I think that's really, really excellent. Well, we are at the top of the hour. My thanks to Becky for presenting, for all of you for being with us today. Do check out the recordings of the Foundation Directory demos that we had. And you can also search in Iowa Learns or on our YouTube channel for a kernel that we recorded with Amy Campbell, the director of the Albia Public Library in Southeast Iowa, who's done a lot of work in her library using grants. So you can certainly check that out and get her tips for applying as well. And I think they echo the 5 rules that Becky said really closely as well. So thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day.